I found this lovely old mill while sketching by the River Seine. It's very near Monet's garden at Giverny, and in fact Monet did paint this mill himself. I always start with a drawing to get to know the subject and then continue with watercolour afterwards. So the pencil isn't dominant, I usually rub it back with a putty rubber just to lighten it a little. I'm painting the sky with cobalt blue to show what a warm sunny day it is. And then on top of the hillside opposite, I'm going to add some depth to the picture by adding a little bit of Naples yellow just to give a feeling of distance. I'm mixing Azilian crimson, yellow ochre and French ultramarine together to make a homemade grey to paint the bridge. What I'm doing is starting at the top and just trying to pick out any features that are very obvious or dominant. There is some foliage to go on, so I'm not filling the paper 100%. And if I drop in some yellow ochre, it will just give the illusion of sunshine hitting the bridge. In contrast, the mill is cream. So the next thing I'm going to do while the bridge is drying is get a flat brush and use yellow ochre to put in the main body of the building. I'm using the flat brush because it's much easier to go around the doors and the windows. Our roof is very old, so there's a lovely dip. As it's such an old roof, I'm going to paint it in 2 layers so that I can show all the weathering and detail. Just using a slightly lighter colour than the ridge tiles. As the roof needs to dry before I can put the second coat on, I'm moving on to the weathered wood underneath the mill. I've made up a mix of greys and browns just to give the weathered look effect, and I'll put the shadows on later on when I'm bringing all the tones of the painting together. I've just put a few highlights on this side, and I'm looking at the other side now that's also got a lot of shadow and highlights. Just picking out certain features and perhaps just the odd line to show the difference in the stones that are in the lovely arch. Sometimes in a picture less is more. There's a lot of shadow under the bridge, which I'm not sure Payne's grey is going to work. I might need to tint it, but I'll start. Sometimes you find that you need a richer colour. It's not necessarily level because it is very old. To the roof, I'm just putting in a few little highlights, and then I'm going to put a second layer of paint on which will show a little bit of the first layer through the gaps. Just make up the Indian red burnt sienna mix, water it down, just make some tile patterns. Tiles are laid side to side, so you want the brush strokes to go side to side. The brush isn't too wet, otherwise you can't make the little marks, it all starts to merge. I'm just putting on some more raw sienna. There is a light area here. I suppose it's because it's been repaired over the years. The beams on this building are all very wobbly, but I'm starting with a dark brown paint and a number 4 round brush. And 2 diagonal ones, which again stop at a cross beam. So I'm going to put the cross beam in so I don't go too high. I'm going along putting the very wobbly timbers in. Some of them are twice the thickness of others, some are straight, others are at angles. You've just got to sort it out. So now I can put the nice brown door in, and then these will be lost in shadows and the railings, which are much neater. It's obviously, it's got 6 sections, which I will just suggest in a little while. So the windows, there's one showing the sky through from the other side of the building, so I'll pop some blue in and then work round that. The others haven't got anything showing through. And there's similar wood in the dormers, so I can put one lot of wood in, and then the other one is a different colour, different age. I'm mixing a bluey green for the far riverbank. In the foliage that's very close, I will add more yellow to separate it. It's a very random hillside because there's buildings going up into it, but I'll stick the green in, and then the suggestion of a few buildings and a little bit of indigo to suggest some shadow. Put that in lightly as though the trees are going in rows, and then return with some earthy colour just to give it a little bit of bounce. Just keep changing the colours every few strokes and it'll look more sincere. It's always a good idea to mix them rather than use them straight from the tube or the pan. And a little bit of earth colour again. I want the mill house to bounce forward in the picture, which it does at the moment because it's got nice warm colours. I've put greeny blues, and there's some boats underneath that I'm going to put in next because I don't want them to clash. I want this to still stand out. Now, if you're not used to drawing boats, don't be put off. It's quite easy. If you've got an angle on a boat or on your reference, use an envelope. So just put the envelope lightly on the telephone and just work out which way an angle goes. This is the white boat, so I'll put that one in, and the red boat there, and the other side of the red boat. And I'll transfer these here. So the white boat, perhaps the angle could be a little tighter, and the red boat, that one's fine, and I'll just put this one in. Just work your way along and don't be afraid, and you can do exactly the same with the top of the boat. The gunnel is just offer the envelope up and you can see that it's higher at the front than it is at the back, and a navy blue one at the back, because we're looking at it from a different angle, it's more parallel on the right, but the left goes up like a tick. I'll put the telephone there so you can see what I'm doing. I'm starting at the back of the group of boats with the dark blue ones and working my way forward. And just check now, the lighter blue one is higher than the navy blue one. You can always find something to measure against. Just make a suggestion of it to claim the space. And put loose edges in, and then you can go back and change it if it's not quite as you expected. And then the red one. Now that's the one that's most defined. So if you've got one that's most defined, you've got to be a little bit more particular how you draw it. Ones that are in the background or half hidden don't have to be quite so well done. I'm now going to put the reflection of the masts in. Around the white boat, just doing sideways strokes. doing it very, very pale, and it goes all the way down till it meets the bush, and then it's a little bit lost. So I'll go the other side of it now, and it's wider at one end than the other. As it gets towards the bush, it gets narrower, and there's some shading on it. And then there's another mast that isn't white, but is more cream. So I'll change to yellow ochre, very weak yellow ochre, and put the suggestion around that one. Make it a little bit weaker still. If you've got it too strong, just pick it up with the brush, dab the brush off and go again. And what makes them look like masks is that they're fairly straight, but it doesn't go very far. So I'll stop it short. And then the other one is at an angle. I've got to leave room for the masks on top. So I think I'll go with some shop bought sap green, which is always a good starting point. And add a little bit of lemon yellow just to liven it up. And do the same thing, go around the masks. So I've got one here. Just go down very, very gently with weak paint. And then there's a gap because it's joining another piece of rigging. And then there's a big gap. And the last boat is lost completely behind the bridge supports. So just to make it easier to spot when I come back to it, I'll put some more green in around them. So we've got the suggestion of the mast without too much trouble. But in this case it goes over it. So it's a good idea to just put it in and then put the leaves on top. Now it's not the same colour all the way through. It's been given patterns by the wind going over the top of the surface. So I'm going to do a few areas and then I'll put a second coat on some of them. Going lightly, letting it skip over the page, which it doesn't matter. And then as I get nearer, the colour becomes more intense. There's some darker areas, so what I'm going to do is just get the same brush, go over the top, leave a gap, go over the top. Just to give a few strokes, and then let it jump over the page. And then there's a very dark bit in the middle. You have to look and see what's happening. And then another dark area under the bridge. And then the rest I'm going to do in the manganese blue, just to give a contrast. And there's some green coming out from the right hand bank as well, which I can put in. Just two different blues, just gives the person who's looking at it some variety. So the bushes I'll put on in a minute, and this is all the colour of the bridge support that's reflected. So the next step is to do the bridge supports, which as they're reflected they're slightly darker and slightly richer. So I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre and homemade grey. I've now got a rigger which has got longer hairs. It's the #1 rigger, and I'm going to work on the very spiky foliage that's growing out of the wall and going over the building. So I'm starting from the place it starts growing from, taking some brush off, the paint off the brush, just going along gently, changing colour, adding a little bit of yellow, so I think some variety here, and then a little bit of blue. You just keep mixing different colours as you go. Just take the paintbrush for a walk. making the bush further and further away from the building. I'm going to go in with yellow on top to make green on the page. And it gives a little bit of dark shadow at the same time. Well, then further down, different brush entirely, going out over the water, which is why I put the water in first. The colours can be affected by what's next to them, so this looks a different green because it's next to the blue. And it's quite in shadow at the bottom. So I'll go in with indigo, I think. The riggers aren't quite so clever to stick into a pan. You need a technique. A little bit of indigo. And it goes quite a long way out. But you don't have to do exactly what the reference says. You can go anyway. And it's quite thick at the bottom, so I'll wipe the brush off, get some yellow in the green, and just fill in the gaps with the side of the brush. It's as though it's really hugging that stone. We've got the third type of foliage, quite broader leaves, that's going on this ledge, but it doesn't always look like a ledge until you put more plants in. So they're growing from here. So put them in, take them up. Then I'm going to change brushes to give a different effect. Go back to the number 4 round brush. Just put in little dabs. You needn't change the colour. Sometimes changing the brush will do the job for you. And then we've got much bluer green for something that's not going sideways but growing up and down. So if it's growing up and down, we do up and down strokes. I'm now adding green to the water, which is reflected from the trees on the bank. A little bit of indigo in to make it darker. Just drop it in and find its own way. And then it goes behind all the boats, which I'll do in a minute because it's got to go round the masts. Just get a clean brush and just feather it out a little bit. So it makes more of the boats and the edge of the river. I'm using softer colours and slightly weaker paint to paint the trees and bushes behind the bridge to make them look further away. And then just adding a little bit more detail and depth of colour as I go to make them look more three-dimensional. The foreground of the picture is going to be grass, so the vibrancy of the grass will push them back even further. A little bit of blue because it is further away, so you won't see it as the same shade. Then feather out the edges. Lost and found edges. That's got to dry for a minute, but it's now in harmony with that. That's balanced, this is balanced, and it's your eyes taken through the middle still. The buildings on the far bank look a little bit too similar to this bridge support, so I'm going to put a little bit more definition on them. They are a long way away, and the easiest way to do it is just to make clean marks. Use a mid-brown and just make a few little marks. You don't have to make many marks to make the whole thing look slightly different. Just show that there's a few houses there, some with some grey roofs, which I've already mixed up some Payne's grey. and there's a few bushes, and I'll map off the bushes against this one at the front. So going straight up, I can see that I've got a bush, tiny bit more detail, and then some very dark, which I'm going to use a little bit of everything, mixing it all up. Just a few dark lines going up and down just to separate things. So there's no detail going in at all, just making it look slightly further away than the detail on that. Moving across to the shadows under the bridge, I'm firstly putting in the dark water and then the reflection and silhouette of the leaves. Adding it to this arch, just where it's gone there. Now it's dried for a little bit. Just blend the two together. I'm going to just gently put lines in to indicate the grass going down to the riverbank. There are shadows on it, which is why I've left some lines. What I can do is just put a little bit of sideways strokes on to indicate the blades of grass. Not everything has to be solid. Then I'll get a rigger and move the grass as it's going over the water. Just work my way along, and then there's a bush sticking up, but I can do the grass to the edge of the reflection. Sideways leaves, so I'll just go sideways. Always try and paint things the way they grow. And it makes it look quite different from the grass. Shadows are coming from bigger trees, so I'm going to load the rigger up, not with black or anything, but with the very dark, and just try and do a sideways shadow with the whole length of the brush. And that takes you into the picture. So I'm just going to make a circular motion every now and again. Nothing too different. Just use water on the brush just to give them one soft edge. And then we've got some very dark shadows here that are in the same shape, but I think they're reflections rather than water lily pads. I'll put those on. Just all breaks up the water. Sometimes the more you look, the more you find. And then it comes into lots of reflections here that I've got to put the individual ripples in different colours, so I'll do that in a moment. So I've got a shadow coming here, and then I've got the reflections of this plant here. So I'm just going to, they're not anything too divine, they're just little squiggles. And some more in line with this plant. So I'll put those in. Only a few because this grass is blocking the rest of it. And then there's some very, very dark reflections under this plant, which need to be even darker than I've made it. It's a bit too bluey, so I'll add some brown. You can keep changing your colours. A little bit of water just to work it out. I don't want it to be dominant. Just work them around as a random. And then there's a lot more shadow on this piece here. from the plant. Just make little marks. Then shadows follow back into the water, way down. And then there's very dark beams on the other side, just wetting the brush a bit more. Pictures develop and you have to get everything in harmony, so you don't want to slap down a dark shadow straight away. You want to let the picture come together. And the beams that go across. I'm just going to change brushes to a flat brush, just to try and get definition on that triangle. All the wood is at a different angle. It's a bit like the building on top. It's obviously been there for a very long time. And some of these planks seem to go on top of each other and not going at the same angle. And then I'm changing brushes again. I'm going to try, I'll try this one. Got reflections of the bridge supports. Oh, that works all right. By making all that darker, it's leading you further in, so I can put more details on the boats. I'm now going to go back and put a few highlights on, including around the chimney that I've got. Just makes it show up against the rooftop. And then the next thing to highlight are the roof lights and dormers. Everything has to be adjusted so that one bit is in harmony with another. I'm now adding the windows, and every window has got a different number of panes in. So to make it look reasonable, I'm just putting straight marks in and not worry about anything else. If you'd like to have a go at painting this mill yourself, you'll find plenty of references to it online, as it is near Giverny. It's very well known historic location. When I've finished the windows, I'll just look round the picture and adjust anything that needs a little bit of a highlight to make it more balanced. I'm regularly sketching between France and England, and I do enjoy following in Monet's footsteps if I'm near somewhere that he's painted that you can still access. So it's always good to have a look around and see who's been there before you.